Hello, good evening, and welcome to Face the Nation, coming to you live from Spine Studios in Ratnalana. Stability, sustainability, and shared prosperity. This was the tagline or slogan as the Central Bank of Sri Lanka celebrated its 70th anniversary in 2020, last year. So a good question to ask ourselves as Sri Lankans is, are we any closer to achieving stability, sustainability, and shared prosperity, or have we moved further away from these goals? What is the current state of the economy of Sri Lanka? We're going to be striving to answer three questions on tonight's program, namely, where are we now? How did we get here? And how do we get out of here? And to discuss this, we've assembled a panel of three preeminent professionals in the field of economics and accounting. Let me quickly introduce them to you. We have joining us tonight Dr. Indudit Aponsu, Senior Lecturer at the Department of Economics of the University of Colombo. Thank you very much, Dr. Aponsu, for agreeing to be on tonight's program. We also have Dr. Anura Ekanayaka, economist and former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Ekanayaka, thank you very much for joining us on tonight's discussion. And finally, we're joined by Professor Kennedy Gunawardena, Senior Professor of Accounting Information Systems at the University of Sri Jayawardenepura as well. Thank you very much, Professor Gunawardena, as well. So I'd like to start off tonight's discussion with Dr. Ekanayaka as an economist and former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Where are we now? What is the current state of the Sri Lanka economy in your assessment?
It's a tough question. We are, compared to, it's always relative, the answer to your question. Compared to last year, we are in a much better position. GDP is the measure of the health of the economy. We all know last year the economy shrank by 3.5%. But this year there are signs, going by the first 2 months data available, import, export and so on, that Sri Lanka will fare better and significantly better than last year. Of course, there are many ifs, many unknowns as to where we will get this year. There is no doubt this year is going to be a better year for us than the last year, but the big question is, will we be able to recover what we lost last year and get back to a decent trajectory, or will we merely go on the trajectory which was set in 2019, a growth of a mere 2.3%.
Is the economy currently in a state of crisis, or is there reason for optimism?
It is a mixed bag. See, when you have a degrowth of the economy due to what is called statistical effect, the following year is going to be a good year. We know that COVID situation is better than what it was last year. What we don't know is whether tourism will improve, how long it will take to come back to the normal trajectory.
Dr. Ekanayaka, you mentioned the risks and the ifs. One of the biggest ifs right now is we saw the Public Health Inspectors Association warning that with the relaxed manner in which the public has approached New Year celebrations, for example, with the drop in the managing physical distancing protocols, etc., that it is pretty much a certainty that this is according to the PHI's association, that we will have a third wave of COVID, which might prompt a third lockdown as well. If this happens, is there reason to believe that we might be looking at another year of negative growth?
See, again, if you look at what happened last year, the second quarter was bad. Third quarter sort of on the upward swing, and by fourth quarter things were much better. So, if we have, let's hope not, but if we have a third wave, then we may have a repetition of the second quarter of last year. But I think that the experience of last year would have prepared the authorities as well as the general public like us to face the situation better, be more responsible, and so on. So there is room for optimism on that count. It doesn't mean that it will go away, but the hope is that we will be able to manage it better, that we have all round, we have learned our lessons.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anurag Kanayaka, for your thoughts in this first round. Next, I'd like to speak to Professor Kennedy Gunawardena, Senior Professor of Accounting Information Systems at the Japura University. Professor Gunawardena, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing our policymakers right now?
Yeah, thank you. The first, I would like to start from the World Bank's what says about our economy. They estimated, I think, in 2021 we will achieve the 3.4% growth rate, subject to the three things. One is attracting a foreign direct investment. I don't know how far we can attract. That is a question mark I have. That is a pretty challengeable job. Second one is normalizing the tourism. Now Tourism Act also going to be changed. Again, I have the same questions. And then increasing export. That is also I have another doubt about the currency depreciation at the moment. Now when you go back to the challenges are concerned, we all know that public debts is increasing rapidly, and World Bank says that end of this year, end of the 2021, it became more than 107% of the GDP. That's the situation what we are living today. I really feel that the fiscal policy of the government, especially spending rates and taxation income, and all these are highly challengeable. I don't feel to getting that 3.4% growth rate, it's so simple to the government. We all know that these days we are giving 5,000 rupees to the Samurdhi recipients, and one part of the Samurdhi recipient getting 5,000 rupees, and differently able people and patients, and then elder citizens, they also get the 5,000. There is no problem about the senior citizens, patients, and the other people. But Samurdhi recipients, why we are not using them for a workforce? That's another, that's a spending, government unnecessarily spending a lot of money rather than getting them to the workforce. And right now there are 700 lakhs, that means 7 lakhs, 700,000 jobless, unemployment rate. That's also a challenge. And we have a three-wheel drivers 1 million, no growth, career development under three-wheel mechanism. Now if you count those people together, I think more than 8%, 9%, I think the unemployment rate. At the moment we have 5.4%. After the COVID situation, people lost the job and their income halfly down. Now under this situation, the attracting a foreign direct investment also one of the challenge. Another aspect, managing a fiscal policy, spending rates, the government tax income. After the new government come to the power, they have reduced the taxation, especially pays drastically. They lost a lot of income. Now that's a challenge. Under this challenge, I don't have a feelings for a next period also, or for the next year also. I don't have any good indications. Especially now government is thinking about to, rather than getting money, public debts, they talk about the non-debt instruments. Non-debt instruments mean not because you can't get the money right now. The spending and the cost of the funds is very high. Non-spending instruments mean merging with our government property or selling our government property. Now those are the challengeable. And the work union and other parties, they also raise the issues. Then the next 2-3 years, I think the government have a real struggle, right, with managing human rights in the other way, right. Diaspora is working very strongly, and everything is concerned reaching to the particular level quite questionable.
Professor Gunawardena, we saw that you were talking about how the government has slashed its taxation revenue. As initially it started pre-COVID as a step to, let's say, spur economic growth.
Yes.
But since then, we've also seen recently, there have been allegations of corruption surrounding that specific decision on the sugar taxes. But the government has said that that it was a legitimate decision, and they decided to forego 12 billion rupees in taxation income. Does this strike you as, when you look at these policy decisions that are made, these little decisions, do you see, what's the message you're getting from the government in terms of their taxation policy?
It's very good question. Now I'll come to the different way to answer that one. Now look that very recently government printed more money. The printing more money, their purpose is to stimulate the economy and motivate the people, because the money circulation is very low. People under the COVID situation, people don't go outing, and very less spending, and there are so many reasons, I think, under the COVID situation and lockdown situation. Then money circulation is slow. Then what governments think that printing money and giving to people, then it can be an aggregate demand, can be a go more, and maybe more stimulus things are working. Look that policy, it doesn't work properly. Finally what happened in the banking sector in Sri Lanka, they got high liquidity. When you go to the top 20 companies in Sri Lanka, last time LMD done a research, 7 banks, right, not the other companies, right. Now what is happening right now, stock market is booming in certain days, but not in a steady growth rate. Stock market, we have only less than 297 companies only listed in the Colombo stock market. That is only 20% of the GDP. SMEs and other sectors are 80% of the GDP, right. The developing a country, I think we have to think about the majority part, rather than maybe the stock market development can say, it's like a barometer, we can say, okay, the country is a prosperity and country is developing, but not that. Now income tax is concerned, we need activities, business activities, economic activities we want to enhance to get more funds. Right now government having another plan to giving 100,000 jobs, and there are 60,000 graduates who already passed out, jobless graduates, they also going to give jobs. These all jobs are going to absorb to the government sector. Government sector is not expanding, right. That's have some issues about the government sector itself. Now private sector,
see, we know that there's all of the spending that will come, all of the additional spending that will come. Do you see a plan to raise revenue? Is there, when you look at the messaging that's coming from the government, from the finance ministry, from Inland Revenue, do you see a solid plan in place to ensure that the revenue stream grows and is sustainable?
That is the reason, I think. We can't see, there is any green path. We are getting money, we are attracting revenues. We have always talking about this expenditure patterns. Now some of the programs we have to pay money, and then we have to look after the jobless graduates. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but we have to find out some projects, but it's always going to absorb to the existing government sector, and then some other expenditure. We can see a lot of promises they already made, and they are going to achieve those promises and more expenses, but revenue streams are really lost. That's only thing what they can do right now. There are some agreements the previous government tried to achieve, that MCC and some other ICTA and all, and Singapore agreements and all. Maybe they have to bring down. Very recently, definitely that's the only solution. They have to go out of this situation to get income.
Thank you very much, Professor Gunawardena, for your thoughts as well. And finally, in this first round, I'd like to bring in Dr. Indrajit Ponsu, a senior lecturer at the Department of Economics at the University of Colombo. Dr. Ponsu, same question. Is the economy in a state of crisis? And what are the challenges that are facing the government and the policymakers?
Well, first, thank you so much for this occasion and the opportunity to share the ideas with the audience, with the Sri Lankans in particular. Well, the word crisis, prospects, these are all words of perspective. They are not highly definitional words. If you ask one person what a crisis is, to another person, it's not so much a crisis. Sometimes it could be an opportunity as well. Be that it may, if you take the Sri Lankans...
Sorry, let me rephrase the question on the definition of crisis. As far as the average Sri Lankan citizen is concerned, or average middle class or low middle class person is concerned, who's seen their incomes being halved in some cases, and no immediate sight of prosperity, should they be looking at this as a crisis?
Well, I do agree with you. The word crisis has, though there are many connotations, but then the crisis is very much felt by many people, although there's not so much of crisis visible, like people protesting and talking about their crisis. People seem to have accepted some of the crises as part and parcel of the status quo now. So what I find in this particular situation, and there are two situations that got merged in Sri Lankan situation. One is the COVID situation, which is a global situation, where everybody is coming out of it and getting into it, and nobody knows exactly where they stand. There was a time where India was looking okay. Now suddenly India is in a hell of a crisis. So that kind of situations have been sort of fluctuating, oscillating in many countries. So it is happening in Europe as well. So it will be one side of it. The second side of Sri Lanka is we have a crisis that we have made ourselves into over a period of decades. The way that we manage the economy, the way we handle things, the political front, there are so many crises which are simultaneously working on us. So our situation is even much more critical and much more complex compared to so many other countries. But I'm not saying others are in a better situation. But then at the same time, if you look at this crisis from a COVID point of view, I think we did well. We really did well. Compared to many other countries, we never had the fear of COVID sort of hitting us, and people are moving about, and we have managed to bring down the COVID infection rates. So in that respect, I think we are making some headway out of the crisis. But what we are really struggling at the moment is the other one, the perpetuated economic crisis that has come at a time where we have run short of solutions. So in that respect, our situation is a very fine thread, where we may look good, we may look bad. There can be all kinds of speculations about, if you look at the debt side, foreign debt side, we are not looking very comfortable. Why are we doing the most exceptional import controls, which we had never heard of in the recent past? Again, the same reason. So we are kind of mentally transforming ourselves to see a different solution. Now, then asking the question, do I feel optimistic? I have a conditional optimism. The conditional optimism comes from the fact that I look at the second crisis. The second crisis was, as I see, can be distilled to one single crisis, balance of payment crisis, which we have neglected for so long. We have had economic growth, we have had human development, good indicators, all, but what we really left out was the balance of payment. We had, if you look at the last several years, we have a gaping hole in the trade balance, 11 billion. That means we are spending 11 billion more than what we earn. So we have a gap. Now this gap has to be bridged. Fortunately for us, at least to some extent, those guys who have gone to Middle East sending us over 7 billion. The 7 billion sort of sorted out our thirst for imports, our BMWs, our Lamborghinis, all that we managed because of that money, right? But still, we left another 4.5 billion to 5 billion shortfall. Now, this shortfall, you just can't bridge it. You can't do anything in the local market and bridge this. You have to earn those dollars. Either you have to earn dollars, or in the long run, you have to get people to bring in cash to this country, either as investments or loans, etc. What we resorted was, we didn't look at the 4 billion as an issue. We look at the alternatives of filling that gap. What did we do? We started borrowing. We kept on borrowing. So what happened now is we came to a point, we are on the cliff edge. We are basically have run short of all the alternatives where we could borrow. So what do? What we need to do is we have to go back to the basics. What is the basics? Look, we can't sustain that 11 billion gap. That has to be bridged. That is where our focus has to be. There's no point pacifying everybody else. Okay, you want something, we'll allow you to do that. You want something, we'll allow you to do that. That doesn't work.
So what are the biggest challenges in addressing this gap in getting foreign direct investment? Because you see that whenever there is foreign direct investment tends to become a political problem as well, because the moment they're viewed by a political lens and with the populist agenda, projects are immediately scuttled. Even with the previous government tried to bring in the Singapore Free Trade Agreement, let's say, which they felt would bring in a lot of investment, and that led to a lot of backlash from those currently in government, and that was eventually scuttled, not just from those currently in government, but also the technical head of the previous government as well. Then with this government has tried a couple of investment projects as well, but again things have had to be scuttled because of political populist, I won't say political opposition, but populist opposition. So in this political climate, like Professor Gunawardena says, can we expect foreign direct investment to come in?
Well, I think we are putting several things into one basket here. Foreign direct investment is one aspect of this whole equation. What is really necessary is we got to produce in this country and make dollars out of it. We really have to convert whatever we do here into dollars. Now that is the way out. Then foreign direct investment is a supplementary thing. Now the foreign direct investments there was a time where the foreign direct investments were moving around many countries.
Do we have the capacity in the country to do it? Let's say you're producing what we're doing. Is a example that we were discussing earlier. You can have import restrictions on, let's say, cinnamon, but if you don't have the capacity to actually produce more cinnamon and export it, it's not going. That import restriction is not going. It may actually have a negative impact. It won't really serve its purpose. So when we don't have that environment set up in the country, how can we expect to, how is the solution just we need to produce more?
Okay, now
It always contradicted what the government says.
Sorry, Dr. The first round were
Okay.
not really allowed
let
to
me
interrupt,
explain
but
to
you
you.
can answer in the next
I
round.
think this is where we have got ourselves into a confusion. Now, you mentioning about free trade agreements. Now, the free trade agreements is a one model, which has been basically advocated by certain economists, and even in the World Bank and various other organizations as well. But then free trade agreements, free trade talks are mere talks. Now you go back to the US, they are not talking about free trade. They are going back to different models. So as a country like us, free trade is a model that did not pay back, that really did not pay back. So what is necessary here is you got to convert the production in Sri Lankan context. Whatever the production, you mentioned cinnamon. Cinnamon is just one product, which is a traditional product we have, but there's a whole range of products that can be converted into the export markets. Maybe we may have to start in a small way. Now, if you look at the Sri Lankan exports now.
But Dr. Ponce, you said that we're at the cliff's edge. Is it enough for us to start in a small way now? We'll be dangling off the cliff by the time we get to a medium way and a large way.
I think this is right. This is what I said. The perspectives matter here. You have a status quo, which is bad, right? And if you let it, okay, you have the fear not to challenge it. You say, okay, let's keep it as it is because it's going to be much worse. That's exactly what we have been doing. I think you got to be brave here. You got to look at different scenarios. I would say this government had the luxury of COVID in a way to plug the imports. I'm not supporting that the imports have to be plugged, imports have to be controlled. But had it been done in a time where it was not COVID, you would have seen a major calamity in the global scenario.
One quick question before we open the floor for questions from journalists as well. Dr. You talked about COVID helping to plug the imports. But, if I go to a fancy supermarket in Colombo now, I'd be able to buy, if I had the money, I'd be able to buy some Australian lamb, everything. So when you say import restrictions, who has it really affected? These import restrictions are really affecting the majority of the population. It goes back to what I was saying, have we achieved shared prosperity? There's a minority that's still getting the imports that they want. There's the majority of the population where malnourishment is a problem, or undernourishment, stunting is a problem. That's where, the import restrictions are hitting the hardest, isn't it?
Not quite. I think the import restrictions have two sides. One side is the import restrictions are created in order to create the advantage in the local production, where rather than you import, why not to do it locally? I say, if you look at certain things which have been controlled. Then the second is things like automobiles and other stuff, which have been taking a large chunk of foreign exchange, and that has been plugged. But there are other imports are taking place, and the ones you are talking about, I agree with you, but these are small quantities of imports you are talking about. They are not a large bill. If you just put the whole thing into one basket, it won't come into few millions maximum. So that is the situation. So it is basically, and also we are a country, we are so used to imports, we love imports. Now in that scenario, it would have been socially catastrophic if you had controlled everything and say, look, and if you had gone back to 70s or something, that would have been totally unacceptable. But what I said was, during the COVID, where people have tightened their belts, people have accepted the status quo in a different way, they have changed their lifestyle, so the demand has been somewhat subdued due to the natural scenarios which are coming out of the COVID outcomes. On the other hand, government is trying to take that advantage as well, and at the same time try to look at how to shift this balance for production to create a much larger spectrum of exports, including the imports that we are doing which we could have easily done locally.
Thank you, Dr. Aponso. We'll discuss all this in detail as the show progresses. Let me quickly introduce our journalists this evening. Joined on my immediate left is Zeenat Musafir, an up-and-coming accounting professional herself. And on my far left, we have Deshan Gonawala. And on my immediate right is Jamal Ratnayaka. So let's begin today's questioning with Zeenat.
Thank you, Majid. My first question is to Dr. Aponso. Doctor, the central bank expects a trade, you were speaking about the balance of payment crisis. So the central bank projects a current account surplus for 2021. But given the prevailing economic conditions, how realistic do you think this expectation is?
Well, if you take the current account has mainly two components. One component is called the trade balance, the other is called the service balance, and the transfers balance. Trade balance, which we call merchandise balance, exports minus imports, what they are seeing at the moment is imports are still very high compared to exports. But there is a pattern. When you look at the pattern, you're finding the exports are making headway to a certain extent, and artificially controlled imports are also giving some kind of breathing space to you. So thereby you're trying to manage the trade balance to some manageable levels. This is my prediction. Second is, if you look at the transfers, which is the net positive balance we have in our current account, which is around 7.5 billion last year. If you look at the monthly figures this year, you find from January to February, it's higher than the last year's value. So you are expecting a kind of a further growth in the remittances account. Assuming that these things are going to take place, and assuming that the government policy of pushing imports and import substitution, exports and import substitution, as you can see, there are some of the stock market companies they are the guys who are in exports. They are doing quite well. Haley's, for example, CIC, for example. So that
Dr. Ekanaka, as a former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber, where which a lot of these exporters, the guys that are doing well, are members of, could you tell us, do these import restrictions actually spur growth in exports and in import substitution?
Exports are very much dependent on the recovery of the global economy and the improvement in global demand for the type of products we produce here in Sri Lanka. Now, IMF, World Bank project sharp spurt in growth in the world economy the current year. If it happens, and if there are no further severe setbacks due to COVID, then there is a possibility that there will be room for exports to grow. But remember, most important thing there is the capacity. We have been exporting at goods and in merchandise around $10 billion worth per annum at a time. Now that's the capacity we have. For it to grow more than that, either the productivity has to increase very sharply, or the capacity itself has to increase, which means investments. Even for productivity to grow, technology. So while a process can begin this year, a sharp increase in exports during this year itself is a tough ask, because the momentum has to be built. That's on the merchandise trade. When it comes to services, remember at the best of times, tourism gave us about $3.5 billion. Whether we can get even half of that this year is a big if. Remember I told in the first round there are many ifs.
Yeah.
My take is it's going to be half or less than half of that normal level. There is a slowing down of people going out of Sri Lanka for work. That also has to impact the remittances. Even though January and February we got good numbers, so the answer to your question arises from the balance of payments issue which was raised earlier. Getting a current account surplus this year, in my view, is extremely difficult.
Dr. Ekamaka, when we're talking about the situation with imports and the ability for us to scale up our exports by improving our capacity and technology sharply, is of course, you said it's fine for a process to begin this year. But in the interest of long-term stability, because we need to get to a point where, or at least there is a viewpoint that we need to get to a point where our exports are scaled up to a level where there is a sustainable income coming in from that. Should the Sri Lankan government be looking at it from the viewpoint of, let's take the crunch for now by keeping these import restrictions and focus entirely on scaling up exports? Is that a possibility? Do you feel like that is a policy that the government is following right now?
See, all these are possibilities if we are ready to do the right thing. Now, the way to expand exports in a globalized world is to develop, is for Sri Lankan manufacturers, exporters to link into global value chains, going all the way up to connectivity with the markets. Now, which means collaboration of different forms have to happen with international players and local players. Even for investment, even for introduction of technology, that is a must. Then what is important is for the global players to feel secure to come invest and operate in Sri Lanka, to have a very clear picture of the policy framework, macroeconomic policy, trade policy, and the sector specific industrial policies. When I say industry, agriculture is also included there. So with the policy certainty only you can expect significant collaboration in various forms with the international players. So obviously the authorities will have to understand that and work towards that. It is not something Sri Lankan private sector alone can achieve. Because the world is globalized, supply chains are globalized, regionalized and then globalized, and that's the only way to play. Now countries like Sri Lanka have done it, so it's not something impossible. This is why we have to remain optimistic and figure out what are the things we should do them fast. Don't go back and forth.
Dr. Ponzo was saying that we are at a situation where we've almost run out of solutions, and we tried like different things, and we need to change this status quo of like how we're looking at how we perceive these things. Have we run out of solutions? Because you said that we need to do the right thing. What is that right thing?
I don't really think that we have run out of solutions. We probably are not looking seriously at potential solutions. We are probably shutting down some without truly exploring them. That's
Could you give us some
my
examples of solutions that have been shut down or that are not being explored, Dr. Ibrahim?
No, see, when I say shut down, if we do, on one day we tell exporters, you have to hand over one way or the other 25% of your export proceeds to the central bank. Couple of weeks later say no, don't do it, and another couple of weeks later say no, you have to give actually 10%. Now see how confusing that situation is for a potential investor for exports, right? That's just one example. On one day you hear that all palm oil imports are banned. Then a few days later you hear, no, it's not banned. And now you hear palmolene is banned, but palm stearing for industrial value addition can be imported. So you see, international businesses come into an economy for serious investments or collaboration in any other way when they can see what's the policy framework. If it confuses them, then they will say, all right, I'll wait and see. So it's very critical. Now, when I say shutting down, that's how it happens. It need not be necessarily saying I am shutting you down, but doing things which shuts them down. Or even the story about, it's not about pointing fingers, but what happened in the port investment is another story, right? It's very, so then for a very serious investor who would like to come here for a massive investment in infrastructure, what's the message you are giving?
Dr.
So,
Ismail,
yes.
you spoke of the statistical effect during your opening remarks.
Can you repeat the question? I didn't hear you.
Yeah, in your opening remarks, you spoke about the statistical effect on growth. So because last year we witnessed a negative growth in 2020 and then low growth during the previous 2 years. What exactly do you mean by this statistical effect? And then we have GDP forecasts from the World Bank, from the IMF, from the central bank. So do you think these forecasts are accurate or are they all exaggerated?
See, we have a range of forecasts. Central bank says 6%, World Bank says 3.5 or 3.4, and IMF says 4.5% or something like that. These are all crystal ball gazing, lot of ifs. That's how I started. Remember I said it's good if we can recover the loss of last year and at least get back to the trajectory of the previous year. See, previous year we had positive 2.3%. Last year was negative 3.5%. Add the two together, you get that 6%. It's not a great trajectory. Of course, compared to last year, it is still a positive development. But net, we are standing at the same place. We are not forging ahead. That is our challenge. And to go for that, I don't know whether this is now the time to talk about how we got there, but we can talk about it. See, the economic history of independent Sri Lanka is a history of consuming way beyond what we have been producing and earning. And it's a history of going around the world with a begging bowl and asking us to be given loans. To the IMF alone, our nation has gone 16 times, starting from 1965. And we have to ask the question, has anything changed? And we have to ask the question, is it correct to blame IMF or other multilateral donors, or ask ourselves the question, why did we go around? Why didn't we?
Professor Kennedy, I think I want to interrupt for a minute. You had some objections, I think, when Dr. Ponzo initially made his remarks, and particularly about how the economy was handled, especially over the course of the last year. A lot about borrowings and also money printing. In the face of the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects therein, we saw multiple governments come in and take multiple steps in a policy level to combat the impacts of the pandemic. What do you think Sri Lanka should have done if you don't necessarily agree with the way the economy was handled, especially over the course of the pandemic?
Yeah, very interesting question. Now, what government did, first of all, I want to tell you the COVID is becoming a blessing to the government, rather than what they have really faced to the situation. Even though last couple of months, I think the economic activity little bit boosted due to this vaccine effect, because cluster-wise the vaccine went on, then people have a trust and they come up with the market and do the transaction. Anyway, when I answer to your question, government missed the bus. That's what I want to tell you. They had a huge chances at the COVID situation and before the COVID situation to stop this government spending. The huge, I think, SOS we call state-owned organizations are highly going with inefficient manner and loss-making manner. They had a big chances, even the president's first appointment time, I think the country had a booming in that level. I think people are expecting more from him, and in that particular time, whatever the decision he has taken, people will accept. We had that chance, but that was lost. That is the one thing. And second thing, under COVID situation, people did, it's lesserly affected to the agriculture product. COVID doesn't affect the agriculture sector more. It affected more in our garment sector, our industrial sector only. We are safe in agriculture sector, but we couldn't see that more development. Even though agriculture sector, no more development, reason the government spending again 5,000 in the several situation. The country like us, from the beginning, I think my due respect to my professors here, Dr. Anura, he knows that we were always depend on the free education, free system, free foods, free money, free mechanism. It's essential for certain areas, certain people it is essential, not for a common. For government, spend lot and they printed more money.
That's an interesting point you made, which is exactly what I wanted to get to. So in principle, the idea of the 5,000 donation, you don't necessarily think it was a great idea, or?
Yes, I said that there are two paces here. Differently able people, patient, senior citizen, no problem. They have done some work to our country, contribution done already, paying from them, no issues. But some of the recipients or beneficiaries, but for them, still they feel that getting this 5,000 is spending their own work, but no development happening to country.
But Professor, at a time like that, the question begs, if you look at developed countries, if you look at the United Kingdom, if you look at countries like the US, all of these countries did give handouts to the public.
Exactly.
Particularly during the lockdown period, while I agree that we do rely on an agricultural base, particularly in the urban areas, people don't really have the option of growing their food. So
yeah,
is this not
exactly. I went through what you said. Certain countries they did, but they expected more thing from the people also, not just to give. Now say if you get this money, maybe you want to do some educations, or you have to do some entrepreneurial type of business, or they have absorbed some of the recipients of the government sector minor staff job. They have get through some work from them. It's not totally giving free, not only distributing money. There are things we can get from them.
Do you think this 5,000 rupee, the doling out of this 5,000 rupees created that much of a dependency in your opinion?
That's not much amount for the people who got it 5,000 also, because that's cost of living is like a rocket. I think that is not very important to them as well. But it's for a government like us, it's a huge money. It's like a 400,000 recipients are get 5,000, or it's a cost of funds is a bigger. That is under this situation, I think government can't unbearable,
Right.
and they lost the tax also.
Dr. Ponzo, I think I want to get your opinion on this in that backdrop. Professor Kennedy has made his stance very clear on this. Do you think the circumstances that Sri Lanka found itself in March 2020 and the actions taken within that period, we had vast amounts of money printing, probably record levels in Sri Lankan history, and tends to be a situation where when money printing does increase, you see the economy overheat, and that is a criticism he leveled as well. Do you think that the steps taken were apt, or do you think that the steps taken could have been better thought through?
Well, I mean, there are a few things that I like to intervene as well, but let me just get to the question you're asking. 5,000, whether it should be the right thing to do. Well, theoretically speaking, I would say, look, okay, get the people to do something so that the 5,000 creates a cycle. It's not a handout. It creates a cycle. But unfortunately, you got to have a medium to do this. I mean, you can argue it's a hypothetically most probable and most viable scenario, but practically it's not possible. This is what is happening in the US as well. It's a simple handout. It's not connected with any productivity or anything. It is a simple handout. Even the second round, third round, it's a simple handout. Okay, now the question is it bad? Well, if you look at the economy, what do they do with that 5,000? Do they sort of put it under their mattress or something? No.
Consumption.
They bring this back to the market. Now that's where you create this cycle. That's where you create because then it will be spent on production. So the farmers who are producing things, the small manufacturers who are producing things, well, they get that 5,000 being distributed to them. So that's the way you can create that process. But I agree with Professor Kennedy. When you give something to people, now this has happened in the US as well. I mean, it's a fear. In the US, there are two things happening. One is $15 minimum wage, and the second is this handout. Now, what it does is, the fear is, then there won't be people who are wanting to work. Basically, if you get the cash, you simply be happy with the free money and don't want to work. But I think in the Sri Lankan scenario, I don't know about the US scenario, but in the Sri Lankan scenario, these are the very poor people. This has two benefits. One is, imagine if you didn't give that 5,000 to those people. Many people would have starved, simply starved. Even would have had situations where families are just being thrown out to the street, begging, and even the complete breakdown of the law and order in the country. So they're socially, although we don't speak economically, we don't speak.
It's not an issue, I think, but there should be a plan, Doctor. There should be a plan. Immediately, yesterday saying that today for the New Year festival we are giving a 5,000. Then the Ramadan also we have to give a 5,000, and the Christmas also we have to give a 5,000. But there should be a plan from the beginning, I think. Right, for the year beginning, we have to give money to them. Okay, we have certain objectives. We want to get these people to the workable situation. We always giving money. That is why my questions from the last decades and four or 5 decades, we just giving money, but no development. where we get the development from them, right? The poor people is everywhere there, every country is there, but we want to get their work to the society. At least government organizations have a lot of jobs, minor staff jobs are there. Why we are not absorbing one from their families to one from to the government sector? At least there should be mechanism.
But I need to say something. I think I connect this with Dr. Anureka Nayaka said about the policies, palm oil thing. I think the problem in this country is, on the one side you do something good, but then you get jitters. All of a sudden you think, well, something has to be done very quickly. That's political decisions. Palm oil, I find, is a stupid decision. I don't know what reasons that brought the palm, because it was a coconut oil issue, palm oil getting hit.
Dr.
And then,
if I may intervene here, you spoke about political decisions, and in your opening remarks, you said that this current crisis is a culmination or an accumulation of certain policy decisions that have been taken over the decades. If I may ask you how important it is to have a robust economic policy that stands alone or stands aside from each government's economic policy, because we know that successive governments have introduced their own economic policies, they've had their nuances. How important is it to have a robust economic policy where no government, regardless of which government is in power, can intervene and change it according to their whims and fancies? How important is it for Sri Lanka to have a standalone economic policy that cannot be tampered with?
you're hitting the nail.
Dr. Aponso, if I may rephrase that question, Jayamal, if you don't mind. We saw that the national export strategy was developed 2018 to 2022, and several sectors were identified for development in exports. The main objectives of this strategy were to have a business enabling, predictable and transparent policy and regulatory framework, strengthen the exporters' market entry and compliance capacities, to become an efficient trade and logistics hub, and to drive export diversification. Now, this document, we know for a fact, was built in consultation with exporters themselves, with entrepreneurs, to scale up our exports. The sectors were IT and business process management, wellness tourism, boat building, electrical and electronic components, food and beverages, and spices and concentrates. That's like, for example, like cinnamon and essential oils of cinnamon, so on and so forth. So it was, there was a plan in place and it was being implemented. Right now with maybe COVID has put a spanner in the works, but we don't see anyone talking about the implementation of this strategy or driving it forward anymore. Is it simply because the government has changed?
Well, I think there are three areas, there are three matters being sort of loaded into one single question. The first question is about the political interferences and the political nuances, where basically which get in the way and upset the whole apple cart. I quite agree with what Dr. Ekanayaka said, that when you do these kind of things, even if you're doing something good, now this government said something very good. What they said was, okay, these policies are not going to change for next 5 years. Now, the previous government had the situation of every year there is a policy change. Okay, I'm not going to compare anything, but what I'm trying to say is, in the current situation, it's a good thing. They say we're going to have the tax policy this way, we're going to have the monetary policy this way. Now, that's a fairly stable scenario to bring the risk premium of the investors from a very technical point of view, accounting point of view, so which is right. But then all of a sudden you land something from nowhere which upsets the apple cart. I think the government had to take these matters into very serious consideration. You can't be just impulsively doing things. You got to get someone to think about it, work about it, and look at when you say palm oil being controlled, then the bakery fellows are saying, look here, we're going to have a major problem. I mean, if the bakery fellows are going to have a problem, that's going to have a cost of living problem. So it's going to have a whole lot of other things coming in.
This is a kind of an implementation issue, the government implementation issue. You remember that?
Can I just finish this? Okay.
Yeah.
Then the second point is that about the continuous policies you were mentioning. I agree. I think the problem this country, well, from 1977, we had a continuous certain policy. And that policy went ahead, even with Mrs. Chandrika Kumartungan coming in, embracing the same policy. It was continuing. But then what happened was, it couldn't deliver the kind of goods we had as well. So then there was a war. If you look at the political history during Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa's regime, he did two things. The first thing he did was he was trying to focus on the war, trying to bring it to a finish. And second, this is very clever thinking. He thinks, okay, we got to have the roads, we got to have the bridges, if you are to get the economy going once the war is over. So which is very clever thinking, very clever thinking. But then the downside of that was, I come to my first question. We never thought of, as Dr. Ekanayake said, we never looked at where our real problem was. Our real problem was balance of payment, trade deficit. That was not addressed. That was not addressed sufficiently. And at that time, we had the luxury of loans coming in. Nobody asked, why do you want the loans? Cash is coming in. It's a matter of spending. So we went ahead with all kinds of, which are not bad. Honestly, which are not bad, right? So it really gave the country a platform to show off. Look, we have the necessary wherewithal to take on with you guys. When the Indian guys came in here, they used to tell us, hey, look here guys, I come after 7 years, things have changed so much. So that's the kind of thing. But the problem was this, as you quite rightly said, we had a political ideological problem. This political ideology is affiliated with the party. So one party says, look, this is my model, and changes the whole thing. Now, if I were the president of the last regime, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe's regime, what they could have done was, look, this economy was moving at 6.5%, 7% for the first time in history. Okay, let's get on with it. Let's plug the problems, exploit the opportunities. That was never done. We went back. Then what happened? What happened was 2015 to 2019, we had a worst economic growth scenario. And at a time when the global economy was pretty conducive, oil prices have come down, crashed. So this is a situation. Then you come to 2020. 2020 is first blessed with a situation of COVID coming out of nowhere. So nobody knew exactly what was hitting them. So as a result, we have to
Dr. Aponso, you were talking about the crisis in the balance of payments and the trade deficit. Regardless of the many flaws of the 2015-2019, the Yapalne administration, it's also important to keep in mind that there was probably a major landmark, which probably very difficult for governments to communicate to the public, was that there was a primary budget surplus.
Primary
budget surplus.
Yes.
Okay, I think this is
a major achievement. Was it?
I think the problem in this is where economics can fool a lot of people. There are three balances we have. One is called balance of payment, or a current account balance, or the trade balance. Second is called the budget balance. Third is called the investment savings balance. Okay?
No, just simply, Professor, forget about the balance of payment and all. I think during the last government, cost of living is quite smaller than right now. Right? What happened right now? The sugar prices and other prices and all the essential goods. This is not due to the COVID situation. Not for that.
No,
right? This is some supply chain issues or management issues or efficiency issues of the government. That is clearly mentioned. That
sorry,
look at
I think Dr. Ekanayake has been waiting to get a word in for a few minutes now, so I'd like to give him an opportunity to share his thoughts.
Okay, sorry. I want to come in here because there's a particular narrative which even people like often miss. It is a continuation of the story of going around with a begging bowl, borrowing for consumption and often for investments which don't produce commensurate returns, monumental investments, ego trips kind of stuff. It's very interesting. The real crisis with regard to the foreign debt started manifesting from around 2014 onwards. Until that time, I may be wrong by an year or two, until that time the annual foreign debt principal and interest payments were always less than $2 billion. Then it shot up, and since then it has been averaging 4 to 6 billion with some ups and downs, and this is going to go on at least till 2025, right? And then when you look at our economic growth, what do you see? The peak was, to my recollection, in 2011. 2 years after the war, we hit 9%. With a couple of little spurts, from 2011 onwards, it was downhill all the way. It came down so much so, in 2019 it was just 2.3%. It's not just here. When you look at the graph, it's all the way down. And it's not just a coincidence that this was the time when we were paying out to the rest of the world for settling our past debt roughly $5 billion a year, about 6% of our GDP. So I don't see it, what happened, as a political party kind of or regime kind of issue. I see that it is the accumulation of wrong economic policy followed by everyone without exception in Sri Lanka.
Dr.
And now,
if I may intervene, whatever said and done, we are in some sort of a rut, and external debt obligations are considered the most imminent threat to our macroeconomic stability at present. If this continues on and it aggravates further, does the government tighten its belt? Does it adopt severe austerity measures, or will we, like you rightfully said, grab another begging bowl and have to go to the IMF for a bailout?
See, austerity is already there. Import controls is austerity. Now, whether it will get further aggravated, it all depends on again balance of payments, because that will add to the debt pile one way or the other, and the way we can finance the deficit. Now the government for good reasons, which I also have sympathy with, has decided not to go to IMF. I also subscribe to the view that going to the IMF is not the route for Sri Lanka or for any other developing country based on global experience.
Dr. Can I?
Solution has to be found internally. So, and then government is now looking at bilateral lenders who are helpful to bridge the gap. So the austerity is already there. Will it get worse? Will depend on how do we get the finances to be able to settle the debt. Secondly, with oil prices rising, tourism not recovering, remittances plateauing or even declining towards the end of the year, right? What's the result? It's austerity. Now whether it will be suddenly we hit a cliff and drop down, or will it go gradually become tougher and tougher, is anybody's conjecture. We have to wait and see. It's too many things to predict. But austerity is a given.
Dr. Ekanayake, just since something you mentioned there that I want to kind of elaborate on, and this is developing more into a cost of living problem, like Professor Kennedy mentioned. Now, we do have a shortfall when it comes to our reserves, foreign reserves.
Come back again, the last bit I didn't hear.
What I was saying is that I want to take it towards the cost of living point that Professor Kennedy mentioned with regard to your last remark as well.
Yes, because see, cost of living
just to build up. What I want to ask you is, with the reserves in the state of which it is at the moment, and also like Dr. Ponzo mentioned, they have had to put import controls in place in order to combat any further depletion of the reserves. What you can see, particularly in food prices, is that food prices have shot up and even shortages, especially because of these import controls. Also, with the current status of the reserves and just management in general, we see that the dollar, in the face of these restrictions, is also increasing in value in comparison to the rupee. So there is going to be a point at which we will have to open up to some degree. Are we not on the cards for an extremely high degree of inflation? I wouldn't go so far as to call it hyperinflation. And would that not force inflation and the cost of living to just go up further? Is there a way turning back from that particular challenge?
It's a very important question, but very complex. Many elements. Now, because of balance of payments problem, our currency has been consistently depreciating. 2015 it was about 130, 131 or something. Today it's topping 200. What does it mean for cost of living? We are highly import dependent. A major part of our consumption basket is direct or indirect imports, with high degree of import in that. So what happens? The rupee price, purely due to exchange effect, has to go up, right? Then when you have import controls, what happens? Some goods which have imported raw materials, their prices have to go up because of shortage. Now, take the case, again, let's take the case of oil palm. Now, when oil palm imports are stopped, oil palm using industries have to use coconut oil, right? And coconut oil is more expensive. There are shortages. So all these feed back into the cost of living. At the end of the day, austerity is manifest in the form of increased cost of living, so that people have to cut back on consumption. And this is what has been happening. And the thing is that when the cumulative effect comes in, it comes to a time when it hits, suddenly it balloons. So it's very hard. That's the problem.
I want to add the point to Deshan asked about this import controls and the prices going. I think we got to look at the figures a little more carefully. If you look at the headline inflation, which is going around 4.1% or 2%, and if you take the food basket, which is going at 9%, right? The food inflation is always a very volatile thing. It's not a particular trend that you see,
But over the course of the last 1.5 years, it's been a particular trend, hasn't it?
Because the thing is, there are two things. You got to understand that. Okay, on the one hand, as Dr. Ekanayake said, that import controls are having an effect on various. But then I'm also looking at a different scenario. I get text from various sellers, merchandisers, Everything is on offer, credit card offers. You know, if I looked at this carefully, if you have a lot of credit card offers, that because there's a subdued demand. There is the prices are artificially brought down as well in many ways. So the so-called, even the import controls have not had a major effect on prices as people have predicted. So the food price case is an entirely different scenario. It changes with the weather, demand patterns and all that. So it's very difficult to track it. But what really matters is what is happening to the overall price basket or overall price trends, which has not taken a different turn, and which is globally as well. Globally there is everything, inflation is subdued. And then there was a mentioning about the printing of money. The printing of money has been possible and it is happening everywhere, including the US in a big way, because there's no pressure of inflation. If there is inflation pressure, they'll be very careful with it. So it is not there. Then the other point that Dr. Eknaik mentioned about this, our balance of payment problem and the debt problem started from late 2010s onwards. Why? What happened was, there was a time we were getting loans for nothing. We were getting concessional loans. We were getting loans from the World Bank, IDA, which is basically no interest, and the loan period is 25 years, and we exhausted it. But we kept on with our style of living. We were living beyond our means. And then what we did was we went to bilateral. China gave, but China didn't give a lot of money, though people say Chinese, the whole debt portfolio is about 10%, you know, from the entire thing. So it's not a big deal. And also they are not superly excessive. Where we went wrong was we went to the market. We went for sovereign bonds. I think our debt portfolio has about now 40% sovereign bonds. They are short term, 5 years maximum. 5 years when you, as you turn around, the debt repayment is you're facing. So this is what has happened to us. So we basically didn't change the lifestyle. When the situation got bad, it's like when you don't have cash, you start a credit card.
Yes, Dr.
Yeah, I would like to add another dimension to this money printing and inflation narrative. Yes, true, where inflation rate is rather low, it's not increasing rapidly, there is significant unemployment in the economy, printing money is justified. And that happens all over the world. But the problem in Sri Lanka is this printed money increases the demand for imports. That is why while the unemployment is increasing, inflation is still, you know, 4.5 to 5, early low 5% kind of official data. It's not that bad, but the rupee is depreciating. That is because we are highly import dependent. Printed money, a good part of it goes into increasing imports, and it hits the balance of payments. Absolutely. And the currency again. So Sri Lanka therefore has much less room than most other countries for printing money. We can't manage only by looking at inflation. We have to look at inflation and balance of payments to manage it.
Give me 1 minute.
Yes, Professor.
I just want to answer to the both of them. Now, imports are concerned, the high volume of imports goes for a intermediate goods, right? And second, investment goods. Very small amount going for a consumer goods. That's what I want to tell you. That means whatever the money what we printed, it people not going for a more for a consuming. consumer importing. But this is also again another issue. The government, I like import restrictions, but we have to give alternatives. We have to give alternatives to people. Now look, recently tile restricted, but later stage they have released the one, but because they can't give an alternative for that. Now this is the situation. If you can give an alternative, there are a lot of group of people not only consuming for import industry, there are a lot of people depend on the jobs, right? There are number of people are working because of the import industry connected jobs. If you are going to restrict it further and further, definitely it's again unemployment enhancing. Now that is what the government wants to give an alternative for them, otherwise we can't do this job further and further. And now the trend in the world is not the open economy or not the closed economy, controlled economy. We have to control certain things. I agree with the import restriction, but giving alternatives to the certain products, or in a certain period just releasing is a bad. And another thing very important is what I want to mention here. Under the COVID situation also, there are countries developed lot. Exports also happening very well. Now you can see some Vietnam's development or maybe Nepal developments, right? They also had the same thing. And especially the consumer basket is concerned. Now vegetable price, it's due to the weather condition, it can be increased or decreased, but in the last 15 months it's a rapid, even though without expecting the weather condition, it's a rapid increases. Now cost of living is unbearable today, right? Just giving a 5,000 is not the solution. I think if you can reduce the cost of living, I think we don't want to, people don't want 5,000 or a 10,000. Bus lane, priority bus lane, nobody using that one. I think no any bus driver is following that one. The implementation issues, what I want to tell you, the doctor, there are good policies sometimes, but implementation issues are there, right? Even this palm oil case, right, from coconut oil to palm oil, and where is the implementation issues? But there are so many organizations, maybe some like a rice situation, oligopoly market is there, rather than the, there is no mechanism to control that. Now these are the things people are expecting from this government from the beginning. It's a majority, huge majority they got, rather than the history in the election mechanism. But people expectation more, but that expectation not getting truth yet. That is the reason.
Yes, Dr.
I think the point is this: we have so many different demands, they cannot be converged. I take the very simple example of cost of living. You can handle the cost of living in two ways. One is government can say, look, we're going to have price controls on everything. Okay, but from a market point of view, that's the worst scenario, because it's not going to solve the problem, it's going to suppress the problem and shove it under the carpet. Second scenario, you open the economy, get the imports to come in, the cost of living will go down. Why? Because imports are normally tend to be cost wise more competitive. But then the other side of this issue is, if you do the second one, which is the sort of the viable one, you are hitting another major problem. This is exactly what I was trying to say. Even under 2010, 2015, 14 government, when you are focusing on cost of living through imports, allowing imports to coming in, you end up with a problem which we are faced now, where it requires much bigger operations to get the patient out of the intensive care unit. At the moment we are in the intensive care unit. Basically we work out, okay, what's going to be the situation tomorrow. But despite the fact, unless you have the tenacity and the belief, look, I got to go down this path in spite of the fact that this is the way out. This is painful. That's the only way out. I 100% agree with these two gentlemen that the so-called nice scenarios that have been predicted, central bank says 6.5% GDP growth, and all that are highly conditional. Just take for example tourism. We are expecting tourists, we are expecting of this year 800,000 tourists. We have got only 10,000. So are you going to cover the rest at the end of the year? No way. Most probably no way. So there are things. But I think that when you have a worst scenario, what is the worst scenario that you can handle? And what is the ones that you think as the lesser priority? As far as the prices are concerned, if the prices are going up, what it does is it creates the local producers an incentive to produce more. So you might have a hard time, but if you handle the things right, you will be able to have a better tomorrow in a few months' time down the road. But there's another challenge. As Professor Kennedy said, we have a bus lane. Nobody cares. This is what we are in this country. Let's look at ourselves. We go in front of the mirror. Am I following the discipline? Am I following the rules? We are not. So we are a democracy where everybody wants to do things the way they want to do things. And if you say, look, this has to be done this way, then it is dictatorial. So we are having a situation where we want to have everything. When we want to have everything, we have a very difficult scenario of balancing things. Vietnam, for example. One advantage Vietnam has is Vietnam doesn't have a democracy. Vietnam does not have it's one single man. Now, even our executive president used to be that kind of thing. When Mr. Jayawarden became the president, he said, look here, there's nothing not possible under this system. And he did it. When Mr. Premadasa came into power, he did the same thing. But gradually it kind of diluted because of various other democratic forces and all that. So what we are having now is even the president
Dr. Ponzo, it seems that you're suggesting that our economic woes are a result of democracy.
No, that's the status quo we have. I'm not, don't get me wrong. Democracy is a privilege we all have. But within that privilege, people are thinking individually and differently.
That's implementation issues, Professor.
Yeah, but then the problem is this. Even the president comes, you have a batch of parliamentarians who understand next to nothing of your policy. How do you run the system? I think this is the serious problem we have. Perhaps president will have to put his foot down and say, look here, this is the way I plan and this is the way I'm going to go ahead. But then immediately the international pressure will come and say, look here, we are going back. So we are that is why I said we are in a situation where our choices are very, very limited. If you take one side, it's bad for the other side.
Dr. Ekanagar, you agree with that standpoint? Our choices are limited.
Let me say this. If you look around the world, look at all the countries and look at their growth trajectories, economic development growth trajectories, you will see that all forms of dictatorships have not been able to have sustained economic growth over a long period of time. They have got spurts of growth and it tapers off. So, on the other hand, countries which have political democracy and inclusive economic institutions have achieved sustained economic development and become developed nations. Not only in Europe, but in Americas. I don't mean only the United States, but the whole of Americas, East Asia, Southeast Asia. That's the story. So democracy is a non-negotiable in my view, and there is no evidence globally to support a view that a more dictatorial regime will be conducive for economic development, sustainable economic development. There have been instances of short periods, but then we have a real problem. What Dr. Aponso mentioned is this lack of discipline, and that's something the nation will have to debate, discuss, and come to an agreement, not only at national level, from village level upwards, as to how we should conduct ourselves in terms of agreeing on what we can do together.
Dr. Ekman, do you agree with the comment that Professor Kennedy made in between, is that the lack of discipline is also a result of a lack of implementation? Let me phrase it, a lack of enforcement. We're talking about this bus lane as a single thing. And like, you see it being repeatedly violated on any morning or evening commute. You'll see that law being repeatedly violated, and there are police officers on the road, but those drivers are not taken to task. There is no enforcement. The law exists, the regulation exists, the rules exist, but there is no enforcement. Isn't that? Do you agree with that statement that the lack of discipline stems from a lack of implementation?
See, there is a demonstration effect when there are powerful people who are not disciplined, who don't follow the rules. Then the others take that example and say, if it's good for him, why not for me? Right? Talk of road discipline, lane discipline. First ask the question, who are the most visible breakers of the lane discipline, the road discipline?
The convoys.
Right. So the answer is there. So the question is to build a culture of how can we build a culture of inclusivity and participatory democracy in a country like ours, where people will agree on a program and then implement. If you don't agree, you have to implement it by force. When you implement it by force, the people concerned don't do it from their heart and soul. So it will be a job half done. I think we are falling short of that.
The reason I think ultimately, doctor, what happened, people lose the trust. They feel that government cannot implement it. The reason the government came to the power with this all unions are helping from the unions, know that bus people also helping to them, other people also help to them. Then something they are going to implement it, they raise their hand or they make some issues. Then again the government reverse the decision or maybe silence the decision. Finally, what happened? Ultimate thing is the very dangerous thing. People feel the trust. Where is the trust of the government? Government come and go, but the state should be here, right? People want to live here. Therefore, once the decision you taken, government has to implement it, because that decision is a fair decision, is a fine for a community. They have to implement it, reversing or stopping, or maybe only for the particular privileges people only have to use it, or no need. Now we are expecting the government, each and every government come and go, but state should be there. They have to go in here and here. That is what we want to know. We have to think about that.
Yes, Dr.
I think let me just make an intervention about the democracy thing, and then I come to this particular point as well. I fully agree with the point. Democracy is uncompromisable. It has to be one of our luxuries we have. But then at the same time, with the democracy, your challenge is much more complex. Now, the issue is, don't we have a solution? I think there is a solution. The solution is within us, and how do we get it going? First, I think we have an educational system. That educational system should address things very honestly. Discipline, respect, inclusivity. We don't address any of these issues. And what we do are, we have the dream stars. Even the schools are now boiled down to dream stars, you know, popular kids and that kind of stuff. And then I think the media, you guys, have a big role to play. Honestly, I feel more than 75% of the problem lies with the media. Because the kind of stuff you deliver to people have polluted their minds. And they love this excitement. But they don't have the time to think, reflect, and see, look, what is good for us? We blame the politicians. They are victims of a situation as well, because they have got the training which never get them to think, reflect, and discipline. Let me also tell you another thing. Sri Lanka has more than 90%, 95% literacy. That's a huge luxury we have. No South Asian country has that kind of luxury. We achieved that, but we never knew how to put that into good practice. What I mean by that is, literacy means you can communicate with people. Sri Lanka was able to control population, birth control and all that, because of this ability. Because people understand, when something is communicated, they understand in simple language. Now, road discipline. During the, not the last government before, there was a time they said, this is something I experienced, because I travel from Panadura to Colombo every day. And the driving is one of the most hazardous things I go through every day. It's so torturous, so stressful. There was a day, I can't quite remember when it was implemented, they first brought in this lane rule. They said they run a pilot project. 3 days it ran. Believe me, I'm not exaggerating. One of the best times of driving I had. Traffic was still there, but I knew very well nobody is going to cut into my lane. It worked very well. The psychological force. And we did the same thing with clearing garbage in Colombo city and all. We didn't use the force. We created the psychological thing. I don't think we are doing it now. When President came in, he brought in something very important, humility. That was different from the 2014 regime. Simplicity, no tamasha. That's a massive message that should have been taken all the way across. That would have been a rallying force for people. I think what we do miss is, we don't have good slogans that would bring people together, and then they reflect on it, and they become a part of a larger group, larger community. What is missing in this particular point of time is, economically, I think we are doing something, perhaps.
Dr. Aponso, I'm going to have to close because we are running out of time, and we have to go for the final round as well. So I'm going to stop you there, but thank you for your comments, and thank you, Dr. Ekanayake and Professor Kennedy as well. We'll go in for a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll hear closing remarks from our three panelists this evening. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're discussing the state of the economy in Sri Lanka today. And this is, if you're just joining us, unfortunately, it's just the final round. And I'd like to begin this final round with Professor Kennedy Gunawardena, Senior Professor of Accounting Information Systems at the Japara University. Professor Gunawardena, given everything that we've discussed this evening, when you hear the words stability, sustainability and shared prosperity, what do you think Sri Lanka needs to do? What do you think the government needs to do in order to achieve this in the short to medium term?
Yeah, especially I think the government wants to maintain the democracy. While maintaining a democracy, they have to increase or go for economic development. For that, they have to, they really necessary 2-year or a 3-year good plan, good strategic plan. We all knows that, you know, $4.5 billion we want to pay for averagely every year until 2025 for our debts. We have to make some priorities and we have to prepare a strategic plan, and according to that, step by step we have to go. I think right now that is nothing happened, and implementation part is weak, and one says something else, another one says something else. The unity is not there among the ministers, among the everybody in the politicians mechanism, and they have to protect they have to develop the macro figures very well. The macro figures are very less, especially these environmental issues and especially democracy issues, human rights issues. Those things we have to maintain first, then automatically we can attract the foreign direct investment. Everybody look at the micro figures, but macro figures, we don't have such a thing strongly right now. Proper thing is, within this maybe another few years a period, they are in the power, maybe 4 years a period, if they have to prepare a good strategic plan for the whole government and look after the everybody in that case, and it should be a participatory approach and give targets and units and all, I think very easily we can achieve this task. That's what I prefer, and what I thought that the good plan, and we have to adhere to the plan also. Right now what happened, we are not adhere to the plan. Plan is there but doing here and there, but we have to adhere to the plan properly and go for the now the things are quite good. I think I still see that vaccine is also cluster wise there. Anyway, the people forget about the entire mechanism, I think sanitary mechanism right now, but everything we have to, you know, in line with that under this situation and prepare a good plan and work with that plan. Definitely we can achieve these targets.
Thank you very much, Professor Kennedy Gunawardena. Next, I'd like to hear from Dr. Indrajit Aponso, Senior Lecturer, Department of Economics at the University of Colombo. Dr. Aponso, what needs to be done in the short medium term to push the country towards stability, sustainability and shared prosperity?
As far as the country present situation is concerned, there is very little choice as to what we should do, and the government at the moment is addressing the issue of, as I mentioned at the beginning, our most burning issue of trade deficit and the balance of payment. There's no other way. Once you are doing that, the government really needs to get this message across to everybody in the system, the people and institutions, so that they are part of this team. If you expect the government to deliver goods, that won't happen. You got to have the team members doing their particular role, and in the process you might find situations where things might do not work the way it was expected. That's part of the deal. I think the way to do that is government had to play the role of being honest with the people, telling people, look, this is the way it is going, these are the situations, and we all have to work together to get out of this situation. And also, Sri Lanka is sitting on a gold mine in a certain way. The things that we have, the human power we are not being fully utilizing. So to get these people into this particular strategy and to the vision, you got to educate people. At the moment, I find people have their own perspectives. Government is trying to do something, even in the ministerial teams, they have their own interpretations. That should not be the case. You got to have everyone on board working towards this. At the same time, this is the only way, as I see. Different people may have different opinions. As I see, when you look at the political history of this country, we have tried different models. This is the only way we can look forward to seeing light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Indrajit Aponso as well. And finally, tonight we'll hear from Dr. Anura Ekanayake, an economist and former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Ekanayake, in the short to medium term, what needs to be done to achieve stability, sustainability and shared prosperity?
I think first of all, everybody should agree that we don't have stability. The situation is not sustainable, and therefore prosperity for all cannot be achieved. That's the starting point. But we must go on a journey with a firm commitment that it is achievable. We have enough underutilized resources, capacity, if properly deployed, can lead to stability in a sustainable manner where prosperity will be fairly and equally shared. Take year-round sunlight, yet we are importing petroleum for energy. We have sea all around us, we are importing fish, we export very little fish. Most of the monsoon Asian countries benefit from one monsoon. We have two. In between the monsoons, we have intermonsoonal rains as well. Are we using that well? As Indrajit mentioned, we have the most educated, at least literate population in the whole of South Asia. Our Human Development Index is still very high. Many middle income countries cannot match us. Are we doing the right thing with it? If we do, we can get there. To do so, two things have to happen in parallel. We have to make our political democracy a living democracy, not just election to election, in between elections as well. Secondly, we have to mobilize our people from villages, suburbs in the cities, small groups, agreeing on plans on what needs to be done in the immediate surrounding at least, and work together. And we got to stop our nation getting divided on lines of race, religion, caste, creed. We are far too divided to be able to do things together. If we can make a start on addressing these, I think we can still be the paradise on earth.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anura Ekanayake as well, and also thank you to our panel of journalists today, Jamal, Zeenath and Deshan. I'd like to, when we were assembling the panel for today's program, We hope we didn't put a damp on your New Year's celebrations with talk of doom and gloom in the economy. As mentioned, there is cause for optimism as well. When assembling the panel today, we tried to cover the entire ideological spectrum of economists in the country, and I think we did manage to somewhat achieve that goal. And it's good because you get hopefully the viewer ends with a balanced perspective on the problems that we're facing and how we can address them. The famous science fiction writer Isaac Asimov once wrote that anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. My key takeaway from tonight's program has been that knee-jerk decisions based on short-term populist agenda for political gain not only erodes at democratic institutions but also causes economic deterioration. Good night, good luck, and on behalf of the Face the Nation team, let me wish you all a happy and prosperous Sinhala and Tamil New Year.